to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our two aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, figures out today show that indeed the UK economy has officially entered into a recession. So tell me then, what should Jeremy Hunt do about it? One of my panellists says we need to tax people more. The other one says, no, it all now needs to be about tax cuts. What says you? And police forces will receive at least an extra £1 million to fight the scourge that is antisocial behaviour. If you had that cash, you were in charge of a police force, how on earth would you prioritise spending it? Do you think we ever can beat antisocial behaviour or not? And there has been a massive rise in anti-Semitism in this country. What's behind that and how are we going to fix it? Also, did you see the GB News exclusive? We've been looking at some barber shops now. Of course, the majority of them are absolutely fine, but some of them now being used as fronts for criminal activity. What is going on? Yes, indeed. Well, we'll be debating all of that and more. I've got Annunciata Rees-Mogg with me and Laurie Laybourne. But before we get stuck in, let's cross live for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that the Chancellor says there is light at the end of the tunnel if the government sticks to its economic plan, despite the UK entering into recession. Official figures show the economy shrank by 0.3% at the end of 2023, after similar contractions in the previous 3 months. That's the first time the UK's GDP has dropped since the first half of 2020, after the first COVID lockdown. Labour says the government is completely out of touch with people's reality. British gas owner Centrica has renewed calls for a social tariff to allow people to pay less for their gas and electricity. It comes as new data reveals British Gas benefited last year from being able to reclaim money lost during the energy crisis. New figures released today show 3 million low-income households in England struggled to pay their energy bills last year. Government statistics showed that 13% were in fuel poverty, largely unchanged from the year before. Detectives say they're keeping an open mind about whether the stabbing of a 16-year-old in Bristol last night is linked to other recent attacks. The teenage victim died after being stabbed in Rawnsley Park by 2 attackers wearing masks, who then fled the scene on bicycles. It comes just weeks after the deaths of teenagers Mason Wrist and Max Dixon, who were stabbed in the Knowle West area of the city. Police have now been given enhanced stop-and-search powers across Bristol as their investigations continue. A Romanian people smuggler has been jailed for attempting to hide 7 migrants in the overhead compartment of his motorhome and then trying to get them into the UK. The group was discovered by Border Force officials at Harwich International Port in Essex last December. 2 of the migrants claimed asylum, but 5 were deemed illegal and sent back to the Netherlands. Minister for Illegal Migration, Michael Tomlinson, says that those putting lives at risk will face the full weight of the law. A judge is facing criticism after liking a pro-Palestine social media post. Judge Tan Ikram spared jail for 3 women who displayed images of paragliders at a protest weeks after Hamas used paragliders to enter and attack Israel in October. He was found to have liked a post which said "Free Palestine" and that branded Israel a terrorist. The Crown Prosecution Service now says it's carefully considering any future actions in relation to the case. Health news and clusters of measles cases are emerging across the UK outside the original outbreak area in the West Midlands. The UK's health agency has reported cases in London, the North West, Yorkshire and the Humber and East Midlands. It's warning hundreds of thousands of children in England are unvaccinated against the disease and remain at risk of serious complications or even lifelong disabilities. Figures show the total number of cases since October has now risen to more than 500. In the United States, Donald Trump will become the first ever former president to stand trial on criminal charges, and it'll take place next month. A New York judge denied his request to throw out a so-called hush money case, setting a trial date for the 25th of March. The case alleges he falsified business records related to a payment made to an adult film star before the 2016 US election. Mr. Trump says he hasn't committed a crime. And here, voters are casting their ballots in the final hours of two by-elections taking place in Wellingborough in Northamptonshire and in Kingswood in South Gloucestershire. The Kingswood vote was triggered after Conservative Chris Skidmore quit in protest over the government's green policy. In Wellingborough, polls open after Peter Bone was accused of bullying and sexual misconduct. He, though, denied those allegations. Voting closes at 10 o'clock tonight and will be broadcasting throughout the night with expert analysis and the all-important results from midnight tonight. And that'll last right through till breakfast. Now, Crystal Palace manager Roy Hodgson is in a stable condition after falling ill during the team's training today. The 76-year-old was due to speak at a scheduled news conference for Monday's game against Everton, but that's now had to be cancelled. The Premier League club have confirmed within the last hour that Roy Hodgson is now undergoing tests in hospital. Keep an eye on that story for you. Now, the first ever commercial US lunar lander mission is heading for the moon.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff.
The spacecraft left the launch pad on Florida's Atlantic coast earlier on today, blasting into the night sky. It's hoped the lander, nicknamed Odysseus, will touch down near the moon's south pole sometime next week. For all the latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks very much for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. So I've got alongside me the former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the author and commentator Laurie Laybourne. Good evening to both of you. That story there about the moon, would you be up for going to see if you could reach the moon and explore it?
No, I'm afraid I am incredibly dull and unadventurous in that sense. I'm quite happy on planet Earth.
You, Laurie?
I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But at this stage now, I mean, if you, I don't know, won a competition or something, at this stage, with the technology as it is, would you be up for it right now?
Yeah, I think I would.
Would you?
Yeah.
I've got a nasty feeling we're following gender stereotypes here.
Really? Really? Well, I'm going to play right into them even more because I definitely wouldn't be up there. For all the love and money would not get me up there, I can tell you that. Are you sitting at home? Would you be interested in exploring space at this moment in time? Not X amount of years down the line when it's all sorted out a bit better, but right now with the technology as it is now, would you trust it? Would you be up for it or not? Tell me. I'm interested to know your thoughts on that. I've got lots coming up for you as well. You know the drill date on this programme. It's not just about us, it is about you as well. GBViews at gbnews.com is how you can email me or tweet next me at GBNews. Now, of course, let's get straight in. You might be aware of this by now because, of course, we've just been mentioning it in the bulletins as well. The UK is officially in a recession. Jeremy Hunt now, what is he going to do about it? Lots of people saying that cutting taxes is the right move. Other people saying increasing taxes is the right move. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, she's been speaking out as well. Let's listen to her.
I do find it extraordinary that the actual Chancellor of the Exchequer is providing a running commentary on his own budget. Now, I worked at the Bank of England for many years and I've been in politics for a long time now. I have never seen anything like it with a Chancellor giving a running commentary. It is dangerous and it is very misguided. I've made no secret of the fact that I want taxes on working people to be lower, but I've also been really clear, including in the speech today, that I will never make a promise where I can't say where the money is going to come from.
Annunziata, what do you make to what should be the approach now?
I think we need to get the economy growing, and that is the most important job the government has got, and the way to do that is to cut taxes. Also, interest rates need to come back down, that inflation is getting itself under control because so much of it was external anyhow and wasn't fuelled by excess UK demand. We need to re-encourage our own demand, improve our productivity and improve our growth, and tax cuts are the most important way of doing that.
So which tax cuts then?
I think you've got to look pretty much across the board, that individual incomes really matter for personal consumption, how much each household has to dispose of as they see fit to fuel that side of the economy. But we also want businesses to thrive and hire people so that more people are active in our economy.
So right across the board, tax cuts then, that'll get the country growing and moving. Laurie, do you agree?
I think we need investment.
Right.
And investment can come in different ways. That can come partly financed by taxes. The UK has not invested in its economy sufficiently for decades now. It's something that's happened under governments of different stripes. And we're starting to see the consequences of that all around us. We're seeing it with school buildings that are falling down. We're seeing it with the massive unpaid maintenance bill in the NHS, which now racks up at about £11 billion. And that's acting as a drag on the economy. It's acting as a drag on our growth. It's making us less productive. And so we need to make sure that we're investing. It's easier to cut taxes and sack a nurse today than it is to invest and build a bridge that we can use and get growth from tomorrow.
Reducing taxes is not an immediate translation into reducing government income. It has been shown through example, cutting corporation tax, that actually when you reduce it, investment from external, non-governmental sources increases and our GDP goes up. And I think there are many ways of benefiting from tax cuts directly. There is a slight lag, but we can afford a lag more than we can to keep this very negative at the moment, but mildly negative at the moment, but very low growth that we have been in now for so long. And if we look at the GDP per capita, which is how each of us actually measure this in our daily lives, it hasn't fallen by the 0.3 the national GDP has. It's fallen by 0.7 in 23. And that is because we are taking on more immigrants who are not being productive than we can cope with. The population is increasing and the pie is shrinking.
So is that fair? Do you agree with what she's saying there?
No, because it doesn't get to the heart of the investment problem that we've got in the country. This is something that there is consensus on. Businesses want more investment.
The way to invest is to bring money
workers.
into the country. You've got to make an attractive place for companies to invest. If you want to increase taxes, to increase investment, as Churchill so famously said, it's like standing in a bucket and trying to pull yourself up by the handle. It doesn't work. You are taking money out of the economy, not putting it in, and that's what we need to do.
So at the moment, we face ourselves in a situation where, because the government isn't investing in the economy, it doesn't mean that we've got investments in the things that will make us more productive as time goes on. The reason why the US, for example, or the EU, or China, all the major wealthiest parts of the world are making massive investments is because investments in things like green technologies, in the infrastructure that we all rely on, in our health and education services, are what's needed to drive economic growth.
Actually, Germany has been doing worse than us in these exact terms. But what we need to do is, yes, have long-term plans, but we need to get the economy going so we can afford to fulfil them.
Am I right in thinking, actually, rather than agreeing with tax cuts, would you go the other way and actually increase some taxes?
In some areas, yeah.
Like what?
I think that you could close the non-dom tax loophole that some parties are talking about. We saw the Prime Minister's tax return, was it last week?
Yeah.
And that showed that the money he's a wealthy guy, fair enough to him. He invests his money, fair enough. The money he then earns back from those investments is taxed much lower than that we are taxed for working. And I think that's something that should be looked at.
So just to be clear, I mean, this is not a Rishi Sunak exclusive tax rate. He is operating under the same tax rules as all of us. But what you're talking about is capital gains being taxed at a different rate, a lower rate, versus, say, for example, PAYE. But then 2 seconds ago, you were saying that you want more investment. So if you want to increase the tax paid on people's returns on those investments, isn't that counterproductive?
It depends where that money is then going. So we're in a situation where, again, let me say it again, schools are crumbling, hospitals are crumbling, and that's acting as a drag.
Is that not a bit of an
the
exaggeration?
economy.
Schools are not, in their entirety, crumbling, are they? You might have a corridor there that's got a bit of rack that's been dealt with, or a classroom there or something. Schools in their entirety are not crumbling, are they? Unless I've missed that?
OK, fine. There have been significant cuts to budgets of major public services, which has mean there's less kit. Buildings are, in some public services, decrepit. And we've had underinvestment in the number of staff. And what that has meant is the key services that keep our society going, that make sure we have productive and healthy workers and so on, are not working very well.
Our schools, universities and NHS has done nothing but increase, actually, overall.
But does that kept up with population growth?
What we really want when we look at the capital gains, I think, it is the most efficient allocation of capital. You want money to be going to the things that are going to be productive for our national economy. And the more you tax that, the more reluctant people are to move their money from things that are dragging to things that are producing. And we need to reduce those taxes so that the money can move to where they can help most.
So there's a huge amount of money that's bound up, private money, that could be invested in this country that's not being unlocked because businesses and investors look at this country and they say, things are not going so well. They've clearly underinvested. The public service is in trouble. Their infrastructure is outdated. Some of their trains don't work on time. And if we invested more in those things, it would unlock more of these private investments.
If we made London a city people could move around, it would be a good start. But our mayor seems to be 100% determined to make it impossible. And every single day he does something ridiculous, like introduce a new charge or rename all the train lines, when what we actually need to do is have vehicles and people being able to move freely around our city. We need to do that across the country. I completely agree there are elements that need investment. But we need private money, external money coming into this country and being productive to do so.
Something that the UK has not been doing well economically for a while now. And taxes have been raised, they've been lowered, corporation tax has been lowered. It's been very consistent. We've tried those things. The consistent thing throughout is that investment has been low. And the investment is lower than our peer countries.
It increased,
investment is lower than
and
people in the G7.
they put corporation tax back up. And the same with capital gains. And actually, they needed to keep to the policy. The short-termism doesn't work. Investors need a
exactly. We need investment.
Economy, knowing what direction it's heading in order to trust their investment.
Reductions in corporation tax in the past have proven that companies are not sitting there waiting and being like, wait a minute, as soon as the UK reduces corporation tax by a slither of percentage, we will suddenly crown in investment. That's not the case. It's investment in our key infrastructure, the things that enable businesses to come along and say, this is a positive environment to invest in.
If businesses had the confidence, as they have done in Ireland, that we would have a consistently competitive, internationally competitive, lower rate, they would invest here.
You could possibly argue, on this recession point of view, you could possibly argue that actually economically it's not hugely significant. People will say that it's quite mild, it'll be sorted out quite quickly. But people would argue it's more politically significant. Of course, Rishi Sunak, one of his pledges, one of his 5, is about growing the economy. And there's no real clarity on what measure we're actually going to judge him on that. The UK economy in 2023 did actually grow. I think it was about 0.1% or something. So it did actually grow over that year. But anyway, do you think it's more politically significant?
It's a technical recession, so it's 2 quarters and that's all it measures. So yes, over the year it was a different picture. I think we want to focus on what households are actually feeling like in this country, and that is not the national GDP, which is being inflated mainly through immigration. It is what we are getting per household, per person, how you look at that as your family unit. And that has been shrinking, and over 2023 it fell by 0.7%. That's what Rishi Sunak needs to get to grips with, and why he desperately needs to encourage growth by introducing tax cuts and encouraging the Bank of England to reduce interest rates.
Yeah, I think that latter one is a key point as well. What do you think in terms of the political significance of it all?
I agree that it's more of a political thing, and that I strongly agree with Annunziata that we need to focus on the stagnation that we've seen over the longer term. And again, we have not invested adequately in the high growth, high productivity sectors in this country. We've had lots of inconsistency from government. Businesses need consistent, predictable policy, and the government has flip-flopped all over the place when it's come to the scant investments that it has made. And that's been very damaging for businesses investing in the really productive, wealth-creating
But everyone's
industries.
flip-flopping. We had the other day Keir Starmer and his pledge, 28 billion or whatever it was, getting reduced. There's flip-flops everywhere.
Yeah, and let's hope that if they get into government, they are a bit more consistent and bold with this. And I think that boldness around investment is something that there would be a huge welcome reception from markets and businesses. They want this investment to unlock their own.
But it was Gordon Brown who changed the definition of investment from being investment in new projects into beginning new things to meaning maintenance. That's not investment. That's what you have to pay to keep the country going.
Yeah, and the way that the government thinks about accounting is a serious problem. The way that we need to, like any business does, you need to understand that investments are highly productive things that you don't want to cut. But politically, it's much easier to cut them because no one notices when you cut a training bursary for nurses today or the maintenance budget for a hospital. But later, when a pandemic comes, there aren't enough nurses, there aren't enough beds, then you notice. So politically, it's easier to cut in the moment, and this is what Hunt may do. But it will always come back to haunt us. And right now, we have a stagnant economy, and that's it coming back to haunt us.
Well, there you go. What do you make to it all at home? And speaking about cuts, you'll be familiar with the fact, of course, that many police officers' jobs, they were indeed cut, wasn't they? Well, now we're looking at how on earth do we get to grips with antisocial behaviour. Every police force in England and Wales, as an example now, will be getting a minimum of £1 million to help fix antisocial behaviour. What do you think, then? Where should that money be prioritised? How do we fix that? And, of course, let's talk about the number of officers, shall we? Can't avoid that one. I'll see you in 2.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the author and commentator Laurie Laybourne. Welcome back, everybody. I was asking you what you think we should do. The corporation tax rise couldn't come at a worse time, says Angela. You don't want to see more tax rises. I mean, I have to say, you are quite divided on this, though, John. He says no more tax cuts, but spend the incoming money on improving infrastructure, i.e. repairing potholes. Graham says we should have continued with HS2. That would have helped productivity. Let me know your thoughts on all of that. Would you welcome tax cuts? And if so, to whom? One of my viewers says, actually, why don't you raise the threshold? Raise the threshold from the point where you start paying tax to £20,000. Is that something you could get behind? Tell me your thoughts on all of that. Let's talk antisocial behaviour then, shall we? Because police, they are going to be dividing up among them. This is England and Wales. They're going to be given £66 million, so a minimum of £1 million per force. It's all about focusing on antisocial behaviour. I found it quite interesting, actually. I'll bring up some images for you about how the Prime Minister actually introduced this. They're talking very much about this £1 million in funding would ramp up patrols. They say it could mean up to 900,000 hours of patrols tackling violence and disorder, the equivalent of up to 540 extra visible police officers in these hotspot areas. It goes on to make a number of claims. It talks about a trial, or trials plural, sorry, that they've been running and the effects that they've had. And also, as well, he says, since 2010, we've made big strides. We've recruited 20,000 more police officers and cut crime by more than half. There's so much I could say about this, but before I start myself off, Annunziata, what do you think?
The phrase "a drop in the ocean" has been used, but considering in the last decade the police budget went up by £9 billion, I think it is safe to say that £66 million really is a drop in the ocean. The current budget is £25 billion a year, and this is going to make remarkably little difference. However, I think the idea behind it is one we desperately need. I think the police need to be seen, and they need to follow the broken windows theory that has been proven everywhere it's been done to work, that you tackle the antisocial, the small crimes, and it leads to big increases in safety of everyone.
That's all well and good if you've got the officers to do that, though. And when Prime Minister says we've recruited 20,000 more police officers, well, yeah, but that is to replace the 20,000 that you cut. So basically, you've switched out 20,000 experienced officers and replaced them with 20,000, I don't mean to be disrespectful to them, but initially inexperienced officers.
I think there's certainly a point to that. But one of the biggest problems with our police force is that if they arrest anyone, they spend the rest of their shift, and quite often some of their overtime as well, filling out forms in the police station. And what we need is swift justice, with the policemen back on the beat, doing the job that we need them to do.
Indeed, Laurie?
I think that what's good behind this is the focus on the community. So I, growing up, remember there being PCSOs, the community support officers, hanging around. You know, they were near the schools. Some of us got to know them. And it was a presence in the community of the police. And that really did act well. It meant that people understood culturally the problems of the community. The police understood that, we respected them. And per the point you were saying about cuts in the number of police officers, if we look actually at the cuts to PCSOs, there were about 17,000 of them when the Conservatives came in 2010. By 2022, that had about halved to about 8,000 PCSOs. Similarly with special constables as well, those volunteering police officers, there are about 20,000 of those at the beginning of the 2010s, and that dropped by over half to about 8,500. So there's been this massive paring back of the capacity of the police to be in the community. And this is a direct result of the underinvestment that I was talking about earlier, and it comes back to haunt us.
How much more investment can be required? The amount spent on the police budget has gone up by 56% in a decade. That is way ahead of inflation. It's not the lack of resources, it's the lack of focus and focusing on the wrong things. And paperwork and filling in forms needs to be cut right down to the bare minimum so that the police can do their actual jobs.
So I agree with there's a lack of resource in certain places, so there are less PCSOs, and I think that is a problem. There is a very acute lack of resource, money resource. We're talking about people resource or PCSO, but money resource in the criminal justice system. The cuts that have been experienced there over the 2010s were significant, and that has created a massive backing up of our ability to process cases and to actually keep that going, and also people's access to justice because legal aid has been cut. So these are the consequences of underinvestment. I don't know the figures about the current police budget and how that may or may not have gone up, but I do have the figures for how the number of PCSOs and so on are not in the community, and I think that's a problem.
And I agree that PCSOs can provide an incredibly useful service. My cousin was one, and I remember him saying that he was the eyes and ears. He knew where every single, person was, what their modus operandi was. He had the intelligence to feed into the police, who could then knock on their door and deal with the crimes. And I think having that reassurance within the local neighbourhood is also extremely useful. However, sadly, the Police Federation quite often hates having PCSOs around because they feel they're coppers on the cheap.
Aaron says, why are we spending more money on policing if the law essentially seems to be on the side of the offenders? Yeah, I've got to say, there's been quite a few things recently that have made me look at that and go, hang on a second, which side are we on with this? Ian says the only way you're going to stop any of this is for more police on the streets and increased stop and search powers. Nigel Farage, you'll know this by now, he's up at 7 o'clock. Nigel, good evening to you. Just quickly, what do you think to this policing situation? Is it going to fix this extra million and odd quid?
You know what? If we don't allow the police to do stop and search, if we don't stop saying we can't stop this community or that community for fear of being called racist, we're never going to sort out knife crime, we're never going to sort out street crime, we're never going to do it. We've got to become a country that is colourblind.
Forgive me, Nigel, again, I couldn't hear you there, but I appreciate your passion. I could see it coming through. Nigel Farage, of course, his show at 7 o'clock. I'll be tuned in for that. Thank you for now, Nigel. Look, this whole notion of, because people will write in and tell me, youth clubs, it's all because people have closed the youth clubs that these kids have got out to do, so now they're on the street doing things they shouldn't be. What do you think to that?
Yeah, I think that when you think of crime and social disorder within a community, you have to think of the things that can create order and cohesion within a community. And anywhere that provides a shared space for that community to come together and to get to know each other and do positive and productive things will help with that cohesion. Youth clubs are an example of that. I grew up in a community where a number of youth centres were the hub for a certain generation, and they got cut as we head into the 2010s. And that means that there are just less places for people to go and develop community coherence and cohesion. And it's similar, we had a youth centre, we had a PCSO who we got to know. There was a whole set of building blocks that made for a cohesive community. A lot of those blocks have been taken away from this underinvestment that we saw in the 2010s.
What do you think to this whole notion that because the kids are doing all this stuff because they don't have the youth clubs?
I think we have to also look not just to the community and to the government to provide support, but to parents to look after their children, to discipline their children and to give them guidelines for life. But also it is your job to keep your kids busy and entertained and doing more wholesome things.
But what about
not all children go, I'm a bit bored, what I want to do is go and smash some windows or steal some sweets or whatever.
Yeah, but what if you're a single parent and you're having to go and work, juggle all kinds of different jobs during the day, during the night and all the rest of it, so physically you're not able to be there when your kids get back after school or whatever, so you're not there to do what you call wholesome activities with them because you literally have to put a roof over their head and food in their stomach?
Which obviously does have to come first, but their well-being is more than food and accommodation. It does have to be guidance, and that doesn't stop you keeping them disciplined and well brought up, knowing right from wrong.
Do you think lack of discipline, parental discipline, is an issue, Laurie?
I don't know. I'm not a parent myself yet. The parents I know are very good at keeping a good balance with the discipline of their kids. I think the situation that you're talking about is one that we should inspect more, though, which is that if you are in a situation where there aren't youth clubs, there aren't public spaces for the community to come together, people are struggling a lot economically at the moment with the cost of living, you are going to find yourself in a situation where the vast majority of people will just be, you know, leading harder lives than the other worlds would have done. They wouldn't commit crimes, but there will be naturally an uptick of some people who just have not got the opportunities and might end up making mistakes. And so we should look at those conditions in which the community exists, the economic conditions, the services and so on as
Alison's got in touch, one of my viewers. She says, I am a former officer and you can give the forces all the money that you want, but ultimately you've got to change the system of arrest, investigation, paperwork and prosecution. I think some of the points that you were just echoing there as well. Mike says the problem with today's forces is that too many specialist departments have been created. There's lots of empire building going on, he says, by senior staff. Jacques, is that how you say your name? You're saying that surely there's nothing more antisocial than crippling cities with protest marches and sit-ins all of the time. Graham says we don't need more police, we need harsher punishments. Jeanette says we should use the money to hire back civilian workers so that more officers can be available on the streets, but she worries that perhaps you've just been moving into the territory of diversity officers. What do you think about more stop and search? Is that the way forward, like one of my viewers just suggested earlier on?
I think it's part of the toolkit, but again, if you've got a community that's experiencing a number of problems like economic hardship, you've got to work with that community as a whole. But
economic hardship, to Annunciata's point, it doesn't mean that because you struggle with money, there'll be a lot of people that struggle with money that don't struggle with morals, that don't go out and commit crime and be violent and all the rest of it. So the two don't always go hand in hand. Yeah, sure, and stop and search is not a magic wand. None of these things can be a magic wand. You just need a good number of things like community policing, well-resourced community policing that is able to work cohesively with a community that hopefully has some of the services that provide shared spaces with people that they can use.
And I think we also do really need laws that are applied consistently. That I think there's an awful lot of leeway given for turning a blind eye on some things and really going after others. And I don't think that helps anyone understand where the line actually is. And if you just look at drugs laws, that all sorts of minor offences are ignored, but the general rule is that they are part of a wider criminal community. And just because it's your own possession makes no difference. Whether you want to totally legalise drugs or totally ban them is a very different discussion, but you need consistent policing.
And Joanne just said, why is nobody talking about that elephant in the room more? Drugs. Dawn says, I am a youth worker, and I've got to say, I'm fed up of hearing we need more youth clubs. She says, no, we don't, apparently. She says, this generation of young people don't like going to youth clubs because they can't do things like vape and drink alcohol in them. She says youth clubs, as people remember them, are obsolete. And I say, she's saying that as a youth worker. What do you make to that? Lots more I want to cover with you tonight on the show. I want to ask you, how do we tackle anti-Semitism? Your thoughts on that? The numbers of people now saying that they have been attacked, etc., going through the roof. What's behind that, do you think, and how do we fix it? I'll see you in 2.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the former Brexit Party MEP Nunziata Rees-Mogg and the author and commentator Laurie Laybourne. Welcome back, everybody. A lot of people are having none of this notion that actually kids are going around stabbing each other because there is no youth clubs. But you don't tell me what your answer is to all of this situation. Of course, you've seen that awful scenario where a boy, 16, I think he was, stabbed today. I mean, it's just, there's no winners in any of this, the people doing the stabbing. I mean, what do you gain apart from a life behind bars? And, I mean, for what? And often these things, I'm not saying about this particular case, often, it's based on stupidity, like who is in which postcode. I mean, really? Is that kind of the level you want to live your life at? I just think it's such a tragic shame for every single person involved, I have to say. Anyway, look, let's talk about anti-Semitism, shall we? Because reports of anti-Semitism in the UK has apparently reached a record high last year. 4,103 anti-Jewish hate incidents in 2023 compared to 1,662 in 2022. Apparently, that's 1 in every 67 Jewish people in England and Wales has been abused. What do you think is going on here, Annunziata? What's behind this?
I think it is a very worrying direction of travel, and the uptick has been enormous since the October the 7th horrific attacks. I have a fear that we as a country are becoming increasingly accepting of attacks on Jewish people for a fear of offending other people. And that concerns me hugely, that it reminds me of the Rochdale or the transphobic debate where good people are scared to stand up for what is right. But if you look at the figures, the 1 in 67 Jewish people has been attacked. There are only 269,000 Jewish people in the country. And if you compare that to another religion, if you compare it to Islam, that 1 in 1,117 Muslims was attacked in the same kind of way. Both are unforgivable. But we have to look after the minorities in our country. And at the moment, the most attacked is the Jewish population.
Laurie, what do you think to it?
I think it's awful, and I are particularly struck by the increase in physical violence and attacks on property. And behind those stats are awful human stories of what that means in practice. So I was shocked actually by this. We obviously heard about increases in attacks and hate towards the Jewish population. The full scale of it is shocking to see. And as Nunziata says, it's something that doesn't have a place in British society.
Well, and 416 of these attacks, which is 10%, were in the 1 week after the October attacks. Now, that is before Israel took any action against Hamas or in Gaza. There is not any kind of justification, however much you might say you hate Zion, however much you might hate Zionists, which is code for anti-Semitism, in my view, that people have decided to switch the word because it sounds a little bit more palatable to attack a nation rather than a religion or a race. But nothing had been done by the Israelis at that point. These are pure anti-Semitic acts.
And do you think, are we getting to the point where, I mean, because I'm going through some of these types of incidents, I mean, some of them are absolutely horrendous. You know, you've got vehicles driven at pedestrians in 10 of these things. I mean, it's absolutely inexcusable. Victims being struck with metal bars, kicked, punched, spat at. It's just awful. It really is awful. Bricks thrown at people, Stearns bottles, etc., etc. Unforgivable, unacceptable. My question is, though, because I was listening to a conversation about this earlier on, and somebody said, well, are we saying that you can't criticise Israel's response? Because if you criticise Israel's response to the situation in Gaza, is that now deemed to be anti-Semitic? Whereas I don't think these two things are linked. I mean, I think there's no comparison between driving a vehicle at somebody and having an understandable issue with children being bombed in Gaza. What do you think?
I think large segments of the Jewish population in the UK disagree with the policies of the Netanyahu administration. A lot of people in Israel disagree with them as well, and I think Netanyahu's in serious political trouble. I agree with you that we should be able to talk about that specific issue of the policies of the current Israeli government and ensure that that is not blurring into full-out anti-Semitism.
The lines are being blurred by people for their own ends, in my view. There are plenty of examples on, for example, X, as it's now called, where people try and cover their pure anti-Semitism by saying it's anti-Zionism. And they could be attacking the government. Netanyahu definitely deserves criticism, but they're not. And when you start calling Zion satanic, you are very definitely crossing into the lines of religion, not politics.
What do you make to it at home? Get in touch and tell me your thoughts on that. Coming up after the break, we did an exclusive, GB News exclusive, excuse me, going behind the scenes of raids on barbershops now suspected of employing migrants, criminal gangs exploiting the high street. We'll get to this after the break.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. The former Brexit Party MEP Nunziata Rees-Mogg and the author and commentator Laurie Laybourne alongside me. Leslie says, why are we focusing just on things like anti-Semitism when it comes to hate speech? What about what's happening with the Christians at the moment? She's talking, or he's talking about the preachers that have just been in trouble. You might want to look when you're bored. Wait till my show's finished, though. You might want to have a look at the Met Police. They've come out and basically said that the media are being unfair in their reporting of what's gone on with that Christian preacher. I'll leave you guys to look into that if indeed you're interested. But for now, GB News Home and Security Editor went with immigration police for a raid on a barber's shop. Let's just have a little look at what was going on.
Heading into this suburb of Oxford, these immigration enforcement officers are en route to raid a local barber shop. It's suspected of employing illegal immigrants. Part of a growing phenomenon where these high street businesses are being increasingly exploited as fronts for criminality.
I've got to be honest, I've got to be clear as well. The majority of barber shops, etc., of course, are fine. They're legit operations, no problem. But we're not talking about those ones. We're talking about the ones that actually are anything but fine, that are fronting criminal activity. What do we do about this?
I think we have to have a zero-tolerance approach to employing illegal immigrants in this country. B, we need a border policy that functions, and C, we need to stop the boats. And if we could actually achieve at least one of those, we would make a significant difference.
Are you optimistic that we can achieve one of them?
I think if we had a strong government who were willing to change the law to prevent us being hamstrung by foreign courts, yes.
It's all about leaving the ECHR, you mean?
I am.
Ah, there you go. Laurie, how do you think we fix all of this?
So I'm struck by the similarity of this to these American sweet shops that have sprung up all around London, which are sort of fronts for money laundering and stuff. And that partly happened because when lockdown occurred, shops went bust, and then landlords want to get people in, and they're going for people who are a bit dodgy. So I think this is partly about rejuvenation of our high streets. I think we should give certain incentives for local businesses, local people to use some of these lots so that they can start up really productive businesses.
But also back to our discussion on the police, we need zero tolerance. That one example I can give of a local town to me in Lincolnshire, someone put on the local Facebook page, oh, what happened to the car wash? And someone else said, oh, it was closed for a raid. It was reopened yesterday. It was closed for 3 days. Everyone knows it's the same people going back, it's the same organisers. If they are victims of modern slavery, they are finding others to replace the workers who've been displaced. We need to actually get to the bottom of this and not just think that it's a perfectly acceptable part of our economy to be undercover, untaxed, black economy encouraging lots of other crime.
Jeff has been in touch and said on one road near me, we've got 14 barber shops that have opened in the last 2 years. I mean, I am laughing. I don't know what your hair is like where you live, but I can only assume that you're not all walking around with massive thatches that need sorting out. 14 barber shops on one street. I mean, I sit here and I think, what's going on in terms of planning? How are you... Right. Because, you know, there's rules in terms of, like, for example, betting shops and all the rest of it, but surely someone must be sitting there and alarm bells must be ringing somewhere, if indeed that story is accurate and that there's 14. Even if there's not 14, even if there's just 5, why would you have 5 barber shops on a street?
I forget how long ago it was, but the story was that nail bars were doing exactly the same. And what I've noticed in Skegness is that some nail bars have gone and barbers have opened in their place. The buildings are being repurposed, but the actual underlying reason for them being there probably hasn't changed.
Who's this? Gareth says there's about 20 car washes in a 6-mile radius where we live. But this is what I'm saying. Surely someone in planning departments are sitting here and there must be certain things that ring alarm bells. Isn't there? Do you not think? It shouldn't take, like, huge kind of undercover investigations and all the rest of it to figure out some of this stuff, should it really? Anyway, lots of people appreciating the conversation tonight, saying thank you to you both. Also, you're a brave bunch. I was asking you at the start, would you go to the moon at this stage in technology? David says, I would definitely go. I would trust my safety in heading to the moon right now more than I would walking around London late at night, he says. Anyway, look, that's all I've got time for. Thank you very much, Laurie, for your company. Annunciata, sorry, thank you for yours too. And you know what happens next, don't you? Don't go anywhere, because Nigel Farage is up straight after me. So for now, have a fantastic night, everybody. And I'll see you tomorrow night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Friday's going to be a much drier and brighter day for many of us, but we have still got some heavy rain to come through the rest of the evening. That's as a result of this weather front that's slowly pushing eastwards across the country through the rest of the day and through tonight. So there's still some heavy rain to come across parts of the southwest. That'll push into the Midlands later on this evening and then into the southeast, but rain should be fairly limited by the time it arrives into the southeast. Behind it, it should turn much clearer as well. So some clear spells to come tonight, but still got very mild air. So it will be another very mild night tonight, frost-free across the country by tomorrow morning. There'll also be some early sunshine, particularly across eastern areas of Scotland, as well as central areas of England too tomorrow morning. And we'll see a good deal of sunshine through the day. Some thicker cloud across parts of northwestern England, North Wales, that could be thick enough to bring some drizzly rain. But in any of the sunshine, it'll feel fairly pleasant. Highs of 13 or 14 degrees in the south or 12 degrees further north. A bright start to Saturday across eastern areas, but cloud will thicken through the day as this weather front approaches. So some drizzly rain in the west through the morning and then a heavy spell of rain to come through the evening across western areas and perhaps on Sunday morning in the east. But once that clears on Sunday, it should be a fairly dry and bright day for many of us, and it will be staying mild all through the weekend. See you later.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive, to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely, on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag, so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Yes, we are in recession. Rishi's 5 pledges are looking ever more tricky. I'll ask and debate tonight, are we getting poorer? And could Labour make it any better? A huge rise in anti-Semitism in the UK. Is the future for Jews living in Britain now looking very bleak indeed? And joining me on Talking Pints, it's a voice known to tens of millions over half a century, sports broadcasting legend, Jim Rosenthal. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight, the Chancellor said